She picked up the coffee cup and she poured it on him. Deliberately. In front of everyone. The hot liquid soaked through his jacket, dripped onto his files, and pooled on the table. The entire cafe went dead silent. And Michael Carter didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He just reached for a napkin slowly, calmly, and looked her dead in the eyes. What happened next made the most powerful woman in that building go pale. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The rain had been coming down since before dawn. Not the soft, forgiving kind of rain that taps gently on windows and makes you want to stay in bed with a cup of tea. This was the other kind, the kind that Boston throws at you in late November like it has a personal grudge. Cold, sideways, relentless. The kind that finds every gap in your collar and doesn't apologize for it. Michael Carter had been walking through it for 6 blocks. He didn't have a car that morning. The transmission on his old Subaru had finally given out 2 weeks ago, and replacing it wasn't in the budget yet, not with Lily's school field trip coming up next month, and the heating bill that had just arrived looking like a ransom note. So he walked. He pulled his jacket tighter, tucked his head down, and walked. By the time he pushed through the glass doors of the Evercrest Technologies building, his shoulders were damp, his shoes were wet through, and the leather messenger bag hanging from his arm, the one with the worn strap he kept meaning to replace, was spotted with rain. He didn't look like a man walking into one of the most expensive private cafe spaces in downtown Boston. He knew that. He also didn't particularly care. Michael was 37 years old, and he had learned a long time ago that the way people looked at him when he walked into a room said a lot more about them than it said about him. He'd learned that lesson the hard way in the years after Sarah died, when he'd had to relearn everything who he was, what mattered, what didn't, from scratch. He found a table in the corner, the one farthest from the door, near the tall windows that fogged slightly in the cold. He set his bag down, pulled out his jacket zipper, and sat. He ordered a black coffee from the server who came by without making eye contact, and then he unzipped his bag and took out the files. They were thick. Printed reports, handwritten notes in the margins, a few pages that he'd color-coded with highlighters he'd bought at the dollar store because Lily had used the good ones for a school project about the ocean. She'd drawn a whale on the cover. He'd kept it. He spread the documents across the table and stared at them. He'd been staring at versions of these documents for 3 weeks. Michael Carter had not always been a man who worked out of coffee shops and walked 6 blocks through the rain to get to a meeting. There was a time not so long ago, though it felt like a different life, when he had a corner office. When his badge got him into rooms that most people at Evercrest Technologies didn't even know existed. When he led a team of 14 engineers on what was at the time the most sophisticated medical data security architecture ever built for a private tech company. He had been 29 years old. He had been good at his job. He had been by every external measure on his way. And then, his wife died. Sarah Carter had been killed in a car accident on Route 93 on a Tuesday afternoon in March. A truck driver who'd been awake for 22 hours had drifted across the center line. She'd been on her way to pick up Lily from preschool. Lily had been 3. Michael had been in a meeting. He'd looked down at his phone, which he'd been told to silence, which he'd set to vibrate, which buzzed and buzzed and buzzed against the conference table, while his supervisor walked through queue, 2 projections, and seen 7 missed calls from an unknown number. He remembered the exact way the room had tilted when he'd stepped into the hallway and called back. He remembered the voice on the other end. He remembered walking back into the conference room, picking up his laptop, his coffee, his notebook, and walking out. He remembered getting in his car. He didn't remember driving to the hospital. In the months that followed, Michael had tried to hold everything together. He'd gone back to work. He'd hired a nanny. He'd told people he was fine because there was no other option, because he had a daughter who needed him to be fine because the mortgage didn't care that his heart had been knocked sideways. But Lily had nightmares. Every night, sometimes twice. She'd wake up screaming for her mother, and Michael would carry her to the rocking chair in the corner of her room, the one Sarah had picked out, and sit with her until she fell back asleep. Sometimes that took 20 minutes. Sometimes it took 3 hours. He was exhausted every day for 2 years, and he began to notice things slipping. Not his work. His work was still excellent. His team still delivered the security architecture they built, was still considered one of the best in the industry. What slipped was everything else. The awareness of Lily's world. The drawings she made and taped to her bedroom door that he didn't stop to look at. The way she'd started eating less at dinner, and he hadn't noticed until her pediatrician mentioned it at the 6-month checkup. He noticed the morning she'd packed her own lunch for the first day of kindergarten, because she'd learned he sometimes forgot and hadn't said anything about it. Hadn't complained. Hadn't asked him to help. She'd just done it herself quietly at 5 years old, because she'd already figured out that her father was somewhere else in his head. That was the morning Michael Carter made his decision. He walked into his supervisor's office that afternoon and resigned. It hadn't been impulsive. He'd thought it through for weeks. He had savings. He had skills that translated to freelance consulting. He could work part-time, set his own hours, be home when Lily got off the bus. He could make her lunch himself. His supervisor had looked at him like he was making a terrible mistake. "You're throwing away everything you've built here, Michael." "I know," Michael had said. "That's the point." That had been 6 years ago. Now he freelanced. Cybersecurity consulting technical architecture reviews the occasional contract work for firms that needed someone who could look at a complicated system and find the thing that didn't belong. He was good at it. He wasn't rich. He was okay with that. He made Lily's lunch every morning. He was home when she got off the bus. He helped with homework, went to every school play, knew the names of all her friends, knew which one was going through her parents' divorce, knew which teacher Lily loved, and which one made her anxious. He knew his daughter. That to Michael Carter was worth more than any corner office. But the work he'd brought with him today, these files spread across the corner table in the Evercrest Cafe, the ones now slightly damp at the edges from where his jacket had dripped, this wasn't a regular consulting job. This had started as something else entirely. 3 weeks ago, Michael had been doing a routine security audit for a small healthcare startup that used Evercrest's third-party data processing services. It was the kind of audit he did with his eyes half open, standard protocol review, access log, verification, encryption, compliance checks. And then he'd found something that made him sit up straight. A pattern in the data access logs that shouldn't have been there. Timestamps that didn't line up. Authentication tokens that had been used in sequences that violated the basic structure of how the system was designed to work. Not errors. Errors were random, messy. These were deliberate. Someone had been very careful about it, but they hadn't been careful enough because the person who designed the original security architecture had also designed the logging system, and the logging system had a particular fingerprint that most people didn't know about. Michael knew about it because he'd built it. He'd spent 3 weeks going deeper. What had started as an anomaly in a single audit had opened into something much larger. The data access violations went back 18 months. They were systematic. They touched financial records, client data, internal communications. Someone inside Evercrest had been very quietly for a very long time taking the company apart from the inside. Michael had tried to report it through normal channels first. He'd sent an email to Evercrest's current head of IT security. No response. He'd called the general legal line. He'd been transferred twice and then disconnected. He'd written a formal summary and mailed it actual physical mail to the corporate address. Nothing. Either the message wasn't getting through, or someone was making sure it didn't. Which was why Michael Carter was sitting in the Evercrest Cafe this morning with a bag full of printed documentation. Because sometimes when you can't get through the door, you have to walk through it yourself and wait for someone to notice you. He hadn't expected the CEO to be the one who noticed. He definitely hadn't expected what she did next. He heard her before he saw her. Not her voice specifically, the shift in the room. The way conversations paused mid-sentence, the way servers who had been moving with casual efficiency suddenly straightened. The way the temperature in the room seemed to change, not warmer, but more charged, like the air before a storm. Michael looked up from his files. Victoria Sterling walked into the cafe like a woman who had never once in her life considered the possibility that a room might not reorganize itself around her presence. She was 34 years old, and she moved with the kind of absolute bone-deep confidence that didn't come from arrogance. Alone, it came from having been right consistently in high-stakes situations for long enough that her confidence had calcified into something closer to certainty. She was dressed impeccably. Charcoal blazer pressed with a fit that had clearly been tailored. Dark trousers, heels that were expensive without being showy. Hair pulled back with the kind of effortless precision that Michael, who struggled to remember to iron his shirts, recognized as anything but effortless. She was objectively striking. She was also, he noticed, immediately looking around the room with the expression of someone conducting a quiet inventory of everything that belonged and everything that didn't. Her eyes landed on him. Michael watched the inventory happen in real time. The old jacket, the worn bag, the damp files, the coffee cup he was nursing rather than letting them refill. The corner table in the VIP adjacent section that had apparently been reserved for people who looked like they belonged in a higher tax bracket. He watched her decide in approximately 3 seconds who he was. He turned back to his files. "Excuse me." Her voice was controlled, precise. The voice of someone who chose every word deliberately and expected those words to land with the weight she intended. Michael looked up. Victoria Sterling was standing 2 feet from his table, and she was not looking at him the way you look at a person. She was looking at him the way you look at something that has been left somewhere it shouldn't be. "Can I help you?" Michael said. "I was going to ask you the same question," she said. "Are you waiting for someone?" "No," Michael said. "I needed a quiet place to review some documents." "This section," Victoria said with the patient tone of someone explaining something to a person who should already know it, "is reserved for corporate partners. It's not a general seating area." Michael looked around. There were no signs indicating this. There was no velvet rope, no host stand, no visible distinction between this section and the rest of the cafe. He looked back at her. "I don't see any signs to that effect." "You don't need a sign," she said. "It's understood." "I see," Michael said. "By whom?" Something tightened in Victoria's expression. She was not accustomed to being questioned. She was even less accustomed to being questioned calmly. "By anyone who regularly does business in this building," she said, and the subtext was not subtle, which is clearly not you. Michael held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back down at his files. "I'll be done in about an hour," he said. The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt longer. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, and her voice had shifted not to something warmer, but to something colder and more deliberate. "I don't think you understand who I am." "I think I do," Michael said without looking up. "This is my company's building," she said. "This cafe operates under an arrangement with Evercrest, which means ultimately it operates according to my preferences." "That may be," Michael said, still looking at his files, "but I'm a paying customer who ordered a coffee and sat down at an empty table. I haven't violated any posted policy." He looked up then, and his voice was even quiet, perfectly controlled. "Is there something specific I can help you with?" The cafe had gone quiet. Not all at once, it happened gradually. Conversation by conversation, as people registered the exchange and decided it was worth paying attention to. Servers had slowed. A man at the counter had turned around, his espresso forgotten. Victoria Sterling was many things. She was not a person who lost in public. She looked at Michael with an expression he'd seen before, not on her specifically, but on a type. The expression of someone who has decided that the most efficient way to end a situation is to make the other person small enough that they remove themselves. "You know," she said loudly enough now that she was clearly addressing the room as much as him. "I've built this company for 11 years. I know every person in this building who belongs here, and I can tell you with complete certainty that you—" Her eyes moved just once deliberately down to his jacket and back up, "are in the wrong place." A few people laughed, quietly. The kind of laugh people give when they want to align themselves with power without looking like they're doing it. Michael said nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and made a notation in the margin of the page he'd been reviewing. That was worse, he knew, than anything he could have said. There is nothing more infuriating to a person who needs to be seen as powerful than being treated as irrelevant. Victoria's jaw tightened. "I'm asking you to leave," she said. "And I'm telling you," Michael said, setting his pen down and looking at her with the same calm he would have used in any professional conversation, "that I'll leave when I've finished what I came here to do." She stared at him. And he would never be entirely certain in the years that followed, whether it was a calculated decision or an uncharacteristic loss of control. But he suspected it was the latter. Dressed up as the former Victoria Sterling, reached out and picked up the coffee cup from his table. There was a half-second where nothing happened. Then she tilted it. The coffee came down across the open files, spread in a dark wave across 3 weeks of documented evidence, soaked through the pages, dripped off the edge of the table onto Michael's jacket and his lap. Hot. Not scalding, it had cooled some, but hot enough that he felt it. The cafe went absolutely silent. Victoria Sterling set the empty cup back on the table. "Oh," she said, her voice smooth, pleasant, untouched, like a woman who had just made a minor social error at a dinner party. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were someone important." The words were perfectly calibrated. They sounded like an apology. They were not an apology. They were the sentence you say when you want to make very clear to everyone listening that you don't think the person in front of you is important at all. It was the kind of cruelty that wears good manners as a costume. The room waited. They waited for Michael to stand up, to raise his voice, to demand she pay for his dry cleaning, to call her names, to threaten to call a manager, to do any of the things that people do when they've been publicly humiliated, and they need to demonstrate that they won't absorb it quietly. Michael Carter sat very still for a moment. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded paper napkin, the kind already on the table. He began calmly and methodically to blot the coffee from the pages of his files. He didn't hurry. He didn't look flustered. He worked with the quiet focus of someone who has learned through genuine difficulty that most situations are not actually emergencies, and the ones that are can't be helped by panic anyway. The room watched him. Victoria watched him. When he had done what he could with the napkin, he set it aside. He looked at the damaged files. He looked at the coffee still dripping from the table edge onto the floor. Then he looked up at Victoria Sterling. And he said in a voice so quiet and so even that the people at the nearest tables had to lean in slightly to catch it. "Thank you." Victoria blinked. "You're welcome," she said reflexively, because manners are a deep groove, and his response had been so unexpected that her social autopilot responded before her conscious mind could stop it. "You just," Michael said, "showed me exactly what I was looking for." He reached into the soaked file. Between 2 pages that had been stuck together by the damp, there was something that hadn't been visible before. The coffee had acted on the paper like a developer acts on film. It had revealed something. Not magic. Chemistry. Specific chemistry, specific paper, a security measure built by a man who had learned long ago to plan for things going wrong. Michael reached in and removed it carefully. He set it on the dry part of the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked back up at Victoria Sterling, who was staring at the object on the table with an expression that had shifted unmistakably visibly from contempt to something else entirely. The color, Michael noticed, had begun to leave her face. He hadn't planned this exactly. He'd planned for many things. He'd planned for resistance, for dismissal, for being escorted from the building before he could make his case. He'd brought the documents in case he got an audience, and he'd built the security measure into the documents in case something happened to them, and he'd hoped for a quiet conversation with someone who had the authority to act. He had not planned for the CEO herself to pour coffee on his files in front of a room full of witnesses, but Michael Carter had spent 6 years learning that the things you don't plan for are often the things that matter most. He looked at Victoria Sterling. She was looking at the object on the table. "Ms. Sterling," Michael said quietly, "I think we need to talk." She didn't call security. Later, she would not be entirely able to explain why. Something in the way he'd spoken, not aggressive, not triumphant, not the tone of a man who had been wronged and now had leverage. Something in the extraordinary stillness of him, in the way he'd sat through everything and come out the other side, not angrier, but quieter, like a stone in a river. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The cafe around them slowly, cautiously returned to its own conversations. "Who are you?" Victoria Sterling said. Michael reached into his jacket pocket, the inside one, the one that had stayed mostly dry, and produced a business card. Plain. White. Name, phone number, email. No logo, no title, no list of credentials. Victoria looked at it. Then she looked at him. "Michael Carter," she said. "That name was on the original security architecture documentation for your company's data platform," Michael said. "The version that went into production in 2019. I led the team that built it." He watched understanding move across her face. Not warmly, it wasn't a warm realization. It was the kind of understanding that arrives with the simultaneous awareness that you have made a significant mistake. "You left," she said. "I did." "Why?" Michael looked at her for a moment. "My daughter needed me," he said. And then, because the simplest answer was the true one, that was more important. Victoria looked at him across the table that was stained with coffee, the files that she had, and they both knew it, deliberately ruined. She looked at the quiet, undressed certainty in the face of a man who had just told her without apology or elaboration that his child outweighed a career that she would have considered exceptional. She didn't know what to do with that. "What did you find?" she said finally. And Michael Carter picked up what remained of his files, the damp pages, the blotted notes, the object the coffee had revealed, and he began to tell her. He told her about the access patterns, about the timestamps, about the authentication sequences that violated the fundamental logic of the system he'd built, and that most people who hadn't designed it themselves wouldn't know how to look for. He told her about the financial records, about the 18 months of systematic irregularities, about the client data that had been accessed by accounts that shouldn't have had that clearance, that had been accessed at times that correlated, if you looked carefully enough, with communications from a particular internal address. He told her that her company was being taken apart, and he told her that someone with access to executive-level authentication credentials had been doing it. Victoria Sterling sat across from him and listened. She did not interrupt. She did not argue. She did not reach for her phone to call someone more important. She sat still, and she listened with the focused attention of a person who has just understood that the situation is significantly worse than she thought. When he finished, there was a silence. "Why come to me like this?" she said. "Why come here, sit in my cafe? Why not send a proper report through the proper?" "I did," Michael said. 3 weeks ago, 2 emails, 1 phone call, 1 letter. He looked at her. "I didn't hear back." Victoria's mouth tightened. "The reason I'm sitting in your cafe," Michael continued, "is that I didn't know who else was involved. I still don't know the full scope of it. What I do know is that someone inside your organization has been burying this, which means that going through internal channels wasn't safe. So you walked in and sat down." "I walked in and sat down," Michael confirmed. Victoria looked at him for a long, measuring moment. "And the coffee," she said. The word cost her something. "What it revealed, how did you—" "Reactive security paper," Michael said simply. "Developed for use in classified document handling. The kind where you need a record of unauthorized access. When certain liquids contact it specifically, coffee specifically at that pH, it activates an embedded record." He looked at her steadily. "I built the original version of that technology into Evercrest's early document protocols, back when I worked here." Victoria Sterling looked at the paper on the table. "You came in here planning for someone to destroy your documents," she said slowly. "I came in here," Michael said, "planning for the possibility that something might happen to them. I try to plan for contingencies." A pause. "I'm a father. It becomes a habit." There was something in the way he said that, not as a joke, not as a deflection that landed somewhere in Victoria that she hadn't expected anything to land. She looked at the object the coffee had revealed, and then she looked at the paper, the specific paper he had used, and the data that was now visible in the areas where the liquid had activated the embedded security layer. She looked at it for a long time. Then she pulled her phone out of her blazer pocket. "I'm calling my head of security," she said. "That's the right call," Michael said. "The real one?" she added, and something in her tone suggested she knew already that the one she'd been trusting might not have been real at all. "Not the one who reports to legal." Michael nodded. "Ms. Sterling," he said as she dialed. She paused. He looked at her with the same level steadiness he'd maintained since she'd first spoken to him across a crowded cafe. "For what it's worth, I don't think you did any of this. What I found." She held his gaze. "You have enough here to make that case convincingly," he said. "If you wanted to." "I know," he said. "I don't want to." The phone rang in her ear. She held it there. "What do you want?" she asked. Michael Carter looked down at the damaged files, at the water ring from the coffee cup, at the pen notations in the margins, the color-coded highlights his daughter's ocean project had depleted the supply for. He looked back up at Victoria Sterling. "The same thing I've wanted for the last 3 weeks," he said. "I want someone with the authority to fix this to actually fix it." She looked at him for one more moment. Then someone picked up on the other end of the phone, and Victoria Sterling said in a voice that left no room for misinterpretation, "Get to the main conference room. Now, bring your team, and lock down the executive-level authentication logs for the last 18 months. Don't touch anything. Don't forward anything. Don't tell anyone outside your direct team. Get there now." She ended the call. She stood. Then she paused, and for the first time since she'd walked into the cafe that morning, she looked at Michael Carter without the inventory, without the calculation, without the verdict already written. She looked at him like a person looks at another person. "My conference room is on the 14th floor, she said. "Will you come up?" Michael reached for his files, damp coffee-stained, partially ruined, and more revealing for it. "Yes," he said. "Let me get my things." He didn't say anything else. He didn't note the irony. He didn't remind her of the last hour. He simply gathered what he'd come with and stood and followed her toward the elevator. Behind them, the cafe sat in the particular silence of a room full of people who have just watched something they don't entirely understand, but know somehow that it mattered. At the elevator, without turning around, Victoria Sterling said quietly, not quite to him, perhaps to herself, perhaps to the room, "I misjudged you." The elevator doors opened. "Most people do," Michael Carter said, not unkindly. "It's all right." They stepped inside, the doors closed, and the cafe slowly came back to life, table by table, conversation by conversation, though every single person who had been there that morning would remember it for years. They would remember the coffee, the silence, the calm, and the man who had sat there through all of it and come out the other side not diminished, but somehow, inexplicably, impossibly larger. On the 14th floor, the real work was just beginning. The elevator doors opened on the 14th floor, and Michael stepped out into a hallway that felt nothing like the warm, polished cafe below. Up here, everything was glass and steel and controlled light. The kind of space designed to communicate one thing above everything else, that the people who worked here made decisions that mattered. Michael had spent years in spaces like this. He knew what they were for. He also knew that the most dangerous things that happened in buildings like this rarely happened in the boardrooms. They happened in the gaps between meetings, in the emails sent at 2 in the morning, in the access logs that nobody thought to check. He followed Victoria Sterling down the corridor without speaking. She walked fast, the way people walk, when they're restructuring a problem in their head in real time, when the framework they'd been operating under has just cracked, and they're trying to build a new one before the old one collapses completely. Her assistant appeared from a side office before they reached the conference room door. Young, efficient, already holding a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who could tell from their boss's posture that the next several hours were going to be unusual. Cancel everything this morning, Victoria said, not slowing down. Everything. No exceptions. And I need you to find out who cleared the IT security report submitted 3 weeks ago under the name Carter. I want to know who received it, who logged it, and what happened to it. Don't ask anyone in the IT security department. Go directly to the mail routing system and pull it yourself. Her assistant didn't blink. Understood. Do you want me to? That's all for now, Victoria said, and pushed open the conference room door. Michael walked in behind her. The room was large. A long table, enough chairs for 20 windows running along one side, a display screen at the far end that was currently showing a screensaver with the Evercrest logo rotating slowly like a patient corporate emblem. Michael set his bag on the table and unzipped it. He started laying out what remained of the files, organizing the damaged pages, separating what was still legible from what the coffee had made unreadable. Victoria watched him for a moment. How much of it can we still use? She asked. More than you'd think, Michael said. The critical data is on the reactive paper. The coffee didn't destroy it, it activated it. He smoothed one of the pages flat on the table and turned it toward her. This is the access record for the 18-month period. Every unauthorized entry, every modified timestamp, every file that was touched when it shouldn't have been. It's all here. Victoria leaned over the table and looked at it. The data was dense. Columns of timestamps, file identifiers, authentication codes, access levels. To most people, it would have looked like noise. Victoria Sterling was not most people. She had built a technology company from the ground up. She could read this, and what she was reading was making her jaw tighten. These authentication codes, she said slowly. These are executive level. Yes. That's... She stopped. She stood up straight. That's a very short list of people. I know, Michael said. She looked at him. And you said you don't think I was involved. I said I don't think you did this, Michael said. What I think is that your credentials were used. There's a difference. Victoria looked back at the paper. Someone spoofed my authentication, she said. Not a question. Working it out. Or cloned it, Michael said. Or had access to your device or your credentials at some point during the window. The pattern of access suggests someone who had your authentication, but didn't have your institutional knowledge. There are several entries where they used your credentials to access files that you, based on your role and your company's organizational structure, would have had no reason to look at. Such as the maintenance schedules for the data center cooling systems, Michael said. And the insurance policy documentation for your physical server infrastructure. Victoria went very still. Michael watched her. Someone was looking at what it would cost, she said quietly, if the servers went down. Or what it would look like if they did, Michael said, and whether anyone would be able to trace it to deliberate interference. The silence in the room lasted about 4 seconds. It felt much longer. Victoria pulled out a chair and sat down. Not the power move of a CEO taking command of a meeting. The movement of someone whose legs had decided without consulting the rest of her that sitting was now necessary. Okay, she said. Okay. She pressed her fingertips to the table. Walk me through it. From the beginning. Everything you found in the order, you found it. Michael sat down across from her. It started with a healthcare startup called Meridian Diagnostics, he said. They contracted me for a routine security audit. They use Evercrest's third-party data processing platform for patient record management. Standard stuff, nothing that should have flagged anything unusual. But it did. The access logs for their data had a sequence anomaly, Michael said. Authentication tokens being used in a pattern that violated the handshake protocol I designed into the original system. Specifically, the tokens were being used in reverse order. They logged into a subsidiary access node before establishing connection to the primary authentication server. That's not how the system works. You can't do that accidentally. The only way to do it is if you know the underlying architecture well enough to know that the security logging system records the initial connection separately from the authentication chain. Victoria was watching him with the focused attention of someone absorbing information that has significant and unpleasant implications. Which means, she said, whoever did this knew your system. Knew it well enough to try to exploit a back channel in it, Michael said. Well enough to know that most security audits wouldn't catch the reversal because the logs still look valid on the surface. They just look valid in the wrong order, and you only know that matters if you built the system and know what the right order should be. How many people know your original architecture that well? Michael looked at her. 14 people built that system with me. 3 of them are still at Evercrest. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Tell me their names. I will, Michael said. But first I want to tell you the rest of it because the names matter less than what I found when I kept pulling the thread. She nodded once. Go ahead. He told her about the financial records next. About the pattern of irregularities that showed up when you cross-referenced the data access timestamps with the company's transaction logs. Small amounts at first, the kind of discrepancies that accounting might flag and IT might explain away as rounding errors or system glitches. But regular and directional, always moving in the same direction. Small sums routing through intermediary accounts to addresses that if you followed them through 3 layers of shell companies landed in a place that had no obvious connection to Evercrest or any legitimate business purpose. How much? Victoria asked. Over 18 months, Michael said. A little under $4 million. The number landed in the room like something physical. Victoria didn't move. That's... She stopped. Started again. That's not enough to matter. Not at the scale of this company. That's not a motive for... She stopped again. It's not the money that matters, Michael said. Or not primarily. The money is a symptom. He leaned forward slightly. What matters is what the money bought. Victoria looked at him. What did it buy? I don't know yet, Michael said. That's the part I need your help with. Because wherever it went somewhere, and whatever it purchased, there's a record of that purchase somewhere. But that record is inside your company's systems, and I don't have access to those systems anymore. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to open my internal systems to you, she said. I'm asking you to open them to someone, Michael said. Whether that's me or your own forensic team, or an outside firm, you trust that's your call. But someone needs to go in there, before whoever's been doing this realizes the trail's been found and takes steps to make sure it isn't there anymore. How much time do we have? Michael glanced at his watch. It was 9:42 in the morning. I found the anomaly 3 weeks ago. I've been careful about not triggering any alerts while I was building the case. But the longer this room is in use, the more people know something's happening, the higher the probability that someone notices and moves to cover their tracks. Victoria absorbed that. Then she pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm bringing in 2 people, she said while she typed. My chief technology officer and my head of forensic compliance. They're the only 2 members of leadership whose authentication credentials don't appear anywhere in the access logs you showed me. That's a reasonable starting point, Michael said. She stopped typing and looked up at him. You already checked. I checked everyone whose credentials were in the system, Michael said. It's a long list. Most of them are clean, but the ones who aren't the pattern isn't random. What does the pattern look like? Michael reached into the bag again and pulled out a single folded sheet, one that he'd kept in a separate pocket wrapped in a waterproof sleeve that had protected it from the coffee entirely. He unfolded it and placed it on the table between them. It was a chart. Hand-drawn because Michael didn't trust cloud-based software for something like this. A network diagram in blue and black ink, showing the relationships between access events, authentication credentials, file categories, and time windows. At the center of the diagram, connected to more lines than anything else on the page, was a single set of initials. Victoria looked at the initials. She looked at them for a long time. When she looked up, something had changed in her face. Not the color this time. Something deeper. Something that looked underneath the precision and the control and the decade of cultivated executive composure, like the particular grief of discovering that a person you trusted has been working against everything you built. That can't be right, she said. The words were quiet, almost private. The kind of words that aren't really addressed to another person, but to the specific version of reality that you were living in 5 minutes ago before it changed. Michael didn't say anything. He's been with this company for 9 years, Victoria said. He was one of the first 5 people I hired. He was there before we had a real office. We worked out of a co-working space in Cambridge, and he used to bring his own coffee because we couldn't afford the good stuff in the building. She stopped. He's been in this building longer than the furniture. Michael watched her. He recognized what she was doing. He'd done the same thing once years ago, reading a different kind of document with a different kind of implication. The mind doing a rapid, desperate inventory of everything it knows about a person, looking for the version of events where the document is wrong. I know, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry yet, Victoria said, and her voice had returned to something harder. Not until we verify it. She picked up her phone. But I want him in a room where I can see him while we run the verification. Carefully, Michael said. I know how to do this. Victoria said with a sharpness that wasn't directed at him. I know you do, he said simply. I just mean whoever this is, they've been careful for 18 months. If they pick up any signal that something's wrong, they'll move fast. Victoria looked at him. Then she nodded once, and her expression reset into something that Michael recognized as professional resolve, the look of someone who has made the internal calculation, filed the emotional response for later, and is now operating in execution mode. She pressed a contact on her phone and raised it to her ear. Marcus, she said when it picked up. Her voice was warm, easy, completely natural. Are you in the building? Good. Can you come to conference room A on 14? I want to run something by you about the Q1 projections before the board call. Bring the revised financials if you have them. It won't take long. She paused. Great. See you in 10. She ended the call. She looked at Michael. Marcus Webb, she said. My CFO. The initials on Michael's diagram were M.W. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Michael reached over, folded the diagram carefully, and returned it to the waterproof sleeve. He replaced it in his bag. He'll look at the room when he walks in, Michael said. He'll look at who's here and do the same calculation everyone does when they walk into a meeting they weren't expecting. So when he comes in, I need to be someone you trust, not a stranger he has a reason to be cautious about. Victoria looked at him steadily. What do you suggest? Tell him I'm a consultant you brought in to review the Q1 security protocols. That's not technically a lie. You've done this before, she said, not quite a question. I've been the person in the room before, Michael said. Figuring out what went wrong. You learn how to move through it without disturbing the surface. Victoria nodded slowly. Then she did something that Michael didn't expect. She reached across the table and extended her hand. I owe you an apology, she said, directly, without preface or softening. For what happened downstairs. That was... She stopped. The word she was looking for apparently didn't satisfy her. She tried again. That was beneath me. And I'm sorry. Michael looked at her hand. Then he took it. You're doing the right thing now, he said. That's what matters. She held his gaze for just a moment. Does it bother you? She said. When people do things like that. Of course it does, Michael said. I'm human. But you didn't react. I reacted, he said. I just reacted on the inside. A pause. I have a 9-year-old at home. She watches how I handle things. I've been practicing not letting what's on the outside show what's on the inside for a while now. Something crossed Victoria's expression. It moved quickly, but Michael caught it something complicated, something that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite admiration, but was in the neighborhood of both. What's her name? Victoria asked. Lily, Michael said. Victoria nodded. She started to say something else, but the conference room door opened. Marcus Webb walked in. He was 51 tall, with the particular kind of groomed confidence that Michael associated with men who had spent enough time in boardrooms that they'd learned to wear authority the way other people wear clothes. He had a leather folder under one arm and a phone in the other hand, still active, a call he'd just ended. He scanned the room as he walked in, and Michael watched the scan happen, the quick calculation of who was there, what the arrangement meant, what kind of meeting this was. His eyes landed on Michael, held for half a second longer than was natural, then moved to Victoria. "Good morning," Marcus said, setting his folder on the table. His voice was easy practice, the voice of someone who was comfortable in rooms like this. "Who's your friend?" "This is Michael Carter," Victoria said. "He's been doing a security protocol review for us. I wanted him to sit in while we look at a couple of the Q1 numbers." Marcus looked at Michael. "Carter." He extended his hand. "Marcus Webb, CFO." His handshake was firm, the kind that communicates confidence without aggression. "What firm are you with?" "Independent," Michael said. "I do project-based work." "Specialty." "System architecture," Michael said. "Security infrastructure." "I built the original data platform for this company, actually, back in 2019. He said it casually, the way you might mention having been to a restaurant you liked. No weight to it, no signal. But he watched Marcus Webb very carefully, and he saw it. It was small. It lasted less than a second. A fractional adjustment in the muscles around Marcus Webb's eyes, not quite widening, more like the involuntary recalibration of someone whose inner world has just experienced a small earthquake. The visible surface stayed smooth. The handshake didn't change. The posture didn't shift. But it was there. Michael had seen it. He was quite certain from that moment forward that his diagram was correct. Marcus sat down. "So what are we looking at?" Victoria opened the meeting the way she would have opened any meeting, efficiently, with clear structure, moving through a series of financial items in the Q1 report, with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times. Michael sat to her right and said very little, listening, taking occasional notes in the margin of a clean page he'd pulled from his bag. Watching Marcus Webb. Webb was good. He was very good. He answered questions accurately, referenced figures from memory, navigated the financials with the comfortable fluency of someone who knew the numbers as well as the person who'd created them. He was relaxed. He was collegial. He made a small joke about the coffee they'd been served and laughed easily at his own punchline. And every 4 to 5 minutes, Michael noticed he glanced down at his phone, not checking it, checking it. There's a difference. Checking your phone in a meeting is something people do unconsciously, reflexively, the way you check a clock when you're not particularly interested in the time. What Marcus Webb was doing was different. His eyes moved to the screen with intention. Quickly. The way you look at something when you're waiting for a specific signal. After the third time it happened, Michael turned his notepad slightly so Victoria could see it. He'd written 2 words. "He knows." Victoria's eyes moved to the page. Moved back to Marcus. Her expression didn't change. She continued the meeting. 2 minutes later she said, "Marcus, while I have you, can you pull up the access records for the Meridian Diagnostics account? I want to cross-reference something in the Q1 security audit." The pause that followed lasted approximately 1.5 seconds. Marcus Webb said, "Of course." He opened his leather folder and looked through several pages with measured deliberation. "I don't have those with me. I can have my team pull them and send them over this afternoon." "Actually," Victoria said pleasantly, "I'd rather do it now. Can you access them from here?" Another pause. "My remote access is limited from this terminal," Marcus said. "I'd need to go back to my office." "That's fine," Victoria said. She pressed a button on the conference room console. "Marcus, before you go, I want to show you something. Michael, can you put the chart up?" Michael reached into his bag. He removed the waterproof sleeve. He unfolded the network diagram. He placed it flat on the table and slid it toward the center. Marcus Webb looked at it. The room was absolutely quiet. Marcus Webb looked at the diagram for exactly 4 seconds. Michael counted, and in those 4 seconds, something shifted in the man's bearing. Subtle, deep, like a supporting structure that has been under pressure for a very long time, making the first small, inaudible sounds of giving way. Then Marcus looked up from the diagram. He looked at Victoria. "Where did you get this?" he said. His voice was still controlled, but it had changed. The ease was gone. In its place was something more stripped down, more careful. "Mr. Carter brought it," Victoria said. Marcus looked at Michael. And this time the calculation in his eyes was not the mild curiosity of a man meeting a consultant. It was the focused, rapid assessment of someone triangulating a threat. "This is speculation," Marcus said. "You can't build a case out of a hand-drawn chart." "You're right," Michael said evenly. "That's why I also have the access logs." He reached into his bag again. Printed from the original system architecture, which uses a logging protocol that can't be altered retroactively. The timestamps are cryptographically signed. Every entry is tied to an authentication token that traces back to a specific device and a specific set of login credentials. He placed the stack of printed logs on the table. Despite the coffee damage, the critical pages, the ones on reactive paper, were perfectly legible, the data standing out clearly now in sections activated by the heat and pH of the liquid. "The authentication tokens aren't mine," Marcus said. "Some of them aren't," Michael agreed. "The ones that trace back to the Meridian data nodes were routed through Ms. Sterling's credentials. But the point of origin, the device that initiated the session before the credential substitution, traces back to an IP address registered to a workstation assigned to your department." Marcus Webb looked at Victoria. "Victoria," he said. And for the first time, the professionalism dropped enough that what was underneath showed. Not guilt exactly. Not yet. Something more complex. The expression of a person who has been caught, not in a lie, but in a choice they made and believed in a choice whose justification they have rehearsed so many times in private that the rehearsal feels like truth. "I can explain this." "I know you can," Victoria said. Her voice was quiet, very controlled. "I'd like to hear it." The door opened. 2 people walked in. Michael recognized neither of them, but Victoria's posture identified them, a slight shift of acknowledgement, the specific kind, that said these were the people she'd called before Marcus arrived, her CTO and her head of forensic compliance. Marcus Webb looked at the door, looked at the 2 people who had just entered, looked at the access logs on the table, looked at Michael, and Michael watched him make the calculation, the one where you add up everything in the room and arrive at the conclusion that this moment has already passed, that the thing you were protecting is no longer protectable, that the architecture you spent 18 months building has just come apart in a morning. "I need to speak to legal," Marcus Webb said. "That's your right," Victoria said. She reached for the phone on the conference room console. "I'll have them called up." Marcus nodded once. He didn't reach for his phone again. Michael picked up his notepad and made one final notation. He dated it. He signed his name below the entry. Then he placed the notepad in the center of the table among the access logs, the hand-drawn chart, the coffee-activated security paper, and he sat back in his chair and let the room proceed without him. He had done what he came to do. The rest of it was for the people whose building this was. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his own phone. He looked at the screen. There was a text from Lily sent an hour ago from the school tablet she was allowed to use during free period. "Did you get to the meeting okay? Did your files get wet in the rain?" He almost smiled. He typed back, "Files are fine. Meeting going well. See you at 4." He put the phone away. Across the table, Marcus Webb sat quietly while Victoria made calls. The CTO had taken the access logs and was moving through them with the focused attention of someone reading a language they know well and don't like the content of. The forensic compliance officer was speaking in a low voice into her own phone. The room was full and purposeful and moving fast, And Michael Carter sat in the middle of it, patient, still drinking the coffee that someone had quietly brought up from the cafe downstairs, fresh, hot, untouched this time, and waited for the work to finish. He was thinking about Lily, about whether she'd remembered to take her library book back today, about whether the leftover pasta in the fridge was still good, or whether he needed to stop at the store on the way home. He was thinking about how the most important things in his life were never in this room. They were in a classroom across town drawing whales on notebook covers, and wondering if her dad's files had gotten wet. That was the thing about being the kind of person who didn't need the power. You were always free to think about what actually mattered. The legal team arrived at 10:17. Michael knew the exact time because he had been watching the clock on the conference room wall, with the same quiet attention he gave to everything in that room, not anxiously, but in the way that a man who has spent years planning around contingencies keeps track of the variables he can measure while waiting on the ones he can't. Two attorneys walked in, both of them carrying the particular kind of organized urgency that corporate lawyers carry when they've been pulled from something else on short notice, and have already been briefed enough to know the situation is serious, but not yet enough to know how serious. The senior one, a woman in her late 40s named Patricia Hale, whose name Victoria used with the easy familiarity of someone who had called her before in difficult moments, took one look at the table at the printed logs at Marcus Webb, sitting very still with his hands folded in front of him, and made a series of rapid professional calculations that showed nowhere on her face. "We'll need the room for a few minutes," Patricia said to Victoria. "Whatever you need," Victoria said. She stood. She looked at Marcus just for a second, and what passed between them in that second was something that Michael recognized as the specific grief of a long professional relationship discovering its own fault line. Then she looked away. "Marcus, I'll hear from Patricia when you're ready to talk." Marcus Webb said nothing. Michael stood and followed Victoria out into the hallway. The door closed behind them. Victoria stood against the wall outside the conference room and pressed the back of her head against it and looked up at the ceiling. It was the first unguarded moment Michael had seen from her since she'd sat down across from him at the cafe table. The first moment where the executive composure wasn't operating as a filter. She looked tired. Not physically tired, the other kind. The kind that accumulates when the work of maintaining a version of yourself that can handle everything eventually has to take a breath. 9 years, she said. Not to Michael, specifically. To the ceiling, or to no one, or to the 9 years themselves. "He was at my grandmother's funeral. He sat in the front row. He cried." Michael didn't say anything. "He gave a speech," Victoria said. "At the 10-year company dinner. He talked about what it means to build something that lasts. He talked about loyalty." She exhaled slowly. He was good at that. Talking about loyalty. "The people who are best at talking about it," Michael said carefully, "are sometimes the people who understand most clearly what it's worth." Victoria turned her head and looked at him. "That's a kind way to put it," she said. "It's the honest way," Michael said. "It doesn't mean he didn't mean it at some point. People are complicated." "Don't do that," Victoria said. "Don't make me feel sorry for him right now. I'll do that later. Right now, I need to stay angry enough to get through the next 2 hours." Michael nodded. He understood that. He understood that anger deployed correctly is a tool. Grief is a tool too. You just can't use them both at the same time. "Tell me what I'm missing," Victoria said. She had straightened up from the wall. The moment of exposure was over. She was back in operational mode, but differently, now less armored, more direct. "You've had 3 weeks with this. What do you know that's not in those files?" "The 4 million, Michael said. "I told you where it went in the first 3 layers. I don't know what's at the end of that chain." "What are your best guesses?" "Not guesses," Michael said. "Hypotheses." He looked at her steadily. "The access pattern on the server infrastructure records, the insurance documentation, the cooling system, maintenance logs. That's not the behavior of someone who wants money. That's the behavior of someone who wants the company to fail in a way that looks accidental." Victoria was very still. "He wanted Evercrest to go under," she said. or wanted to be in a position to benefit when it did, Michael said. There's a difference. One is sabotage, the other is positioning. The first requires much more risk. The second requires patience and access to the right people. What kind of people? Competitors, Michael said. Investors who would benefit from acquiring a distressed asset at a fraction of its value. Someone who knew what Evercrest is worth and wanted to purchase it for significantly less than that. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Michael could see her running the math the way she would have run it in any other business context, rapidly, methodically working through the implications of each variable. If the company's data infrastructure was compromised, she said slowly, if a breach became public, if client data was shown to have been accessed illegally, the stock takes a catastrophic hit, Michael said. Client contracts trigger force majeure clauses. The regulatory investigation alone takes months and tens of millions in legal fees. The company isn't destroyed, but it's damaged. Badly enough that a buyer with patience and resources could come in at the right moment and acquire a controlling interest at a price that would have been unthinkable 18 months ago. Victoria closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When she opened them, something had clarified in her expression. The grief was still there, but it had been moved to a lower shelf. What was in the foreground now was something colder and more precise. I need the name at the end of that money chain, she said. So do I, Michael said. And I need access to systems I don't have clearance for. You'll have it, Victoria said, within the hour. She pushed off the wall and pulled out her phone, and Michael watched her shift fully into a mode he recognized, the mode of someone who is very good at what they do, moving through a crisis with the efficiency of long practice. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't performing calm. She was genuinely operating the way a surgeon operates. Fully present, no wasted motion, every decision connected to the next. He respected that. At 10:43, the conference room door opened, and Patricia Hale stepped into the hallway. Marcus Webb has requested full cooperation in exchange for prosecutorial consideration, she said, addressing Victoria in the flat, precise language of someone reporting a transaction. He's prepared to provide complete documentation of all third-party communications and financial transfers. Victoria looked at her. He talked. He's talking, Patricia said. Past tense would be premature, but yes. Victoria turned to Michael. Come on, she said. They went back in. Marcus Webb was sitting where he'd been sitting when they left, but he looked different. The controlled ease was entirely gone. What was left was a man who had made the calculation, the one where you decide that preserving yourself matters more than preserving the architecture you built, and was now living in the first minutes of the reality that decision creates. He looked older than he had an hour ago. Not physically. In the way that people look older when something load-bearing in their self-conception has just shifted. He looked at Michael when they sat down. You really built the original system, Marcus said. Yes, Michael said. I worked here when you were here, Marcus said. I don't remember you. I don't remember you either, Michael said. Which was true. He remembered the work. He remembered 14 engineers and a security architecture and late nights and the specific satisfaction of building something that worked exactly the way it was designed to work. He didn't remember Marcus Webb, who had been in finance in a different building, in a different world. How did you find it? Marcus asked. Not hostile, genuinely asking. The tone of someone who has spent 18 months believing something was invisible and is now confronting the specific mechanism by which it wasn't. You accessed the logging system in the wrong order, Michael said. 18 months ago when you first started. You didn't know there was a secondary sequence validation built into the authentication chain. Most people who know the system don't know about it. I put it in as a backup. Something that would only show up if you were looking at the logs from the inside. Marcus looked at the table. A trap. Not intentionally, Michael said. I built it to protect the system, not to catch anyone. I didn't know anyone would need catching. Marcus was quiet. Then he said, I need you to understand that this wasn't... He stopped, looked at Victoria. I didn't want to hurt people. The clients, the employees. I didn't want... Then you should have stopped before it became that, Victoria said. Her voice was quiet, absolutely level, the voice of someone who has moved past anger into something more final. Marcus said nothing. "Tell me who you were working with," Victoria said. The name Marcus Webb gave took Michael by surprise. Not because he didn't recognize it, because he did. Daniel Forsyth was not a name that appeared in any of Michael's files. It wasn't a name connected to Evercrest through any public record, any board document, any organizational chart. Daniel Forsyth was a private equity investor based in New York who specialized in distressed acquisitions, companies that had fallen far enough that their assets could be purchased cheaply and rebuilt or dismantled for parts. He had done it 7 times in the last 15 years. He had a reputation in the industry for being patient, methodical, and ruthless in a very quiet way. The kind of ruthless that leaves no fingerprints because it never touches anything directly. Michael knew of him peripherally, from conversations years ago, from the kind of background reading a person does when they're designing security systems and want to understand what kinds of threats exist in the world their system is supposed to protect against. He had never imagined the name would appear in a room like this. "Forsyth," Victoria said. The word was quiet and deliberate and carried the weight of someone placing a heavy object on a table. "He approached me 14 months ago," Marcus said. His voice had found a kind of flat, confessional rhythm, now the tone of someone who has decided to tell the full truth and is discovering that telling it is both easier and more painful than they expected. At a conference in Chicago, it wasn't he was subtle. He didn't ask me to do anything. He just talked. About the industry. About where he saw things going. About the vulnerabilities in mid-sized tech companies that could never be seen from the outside. But he was talking about Evercrest specifically, Victoria said. Not directly, not at first. Marcus looked at his hands. He knew what he was doing. He spent 3 months building a relationship before he ever mentioned anything concrete. By the time he did, I'd already been at dinners with him. I'd already taken his calls. He stopped. I'd already made myself complicit in small ways, small enough to rationalize, and then each thing after that was only a little bigger than the last thing. It was gradual. "And the money?" Victoria asked. Some of it was Forsyth's, payment for access and information. Some of it was money I was moving through the system to simulate the kind of financial irregularities that would trigger a regulatory review. Marcus looked up. The point was never to take money out. The point was to create the appearance of a company that couldn't manage its own finances. That had governance problems. That had data security failures. The point was to manufacture the conditions that would make it impossible to argue against a forced sale. The room was very quiet. Michael was watching Victoria. She was sitting perfectly still, but her hands flat on the table in front of her had pressed down hard enough that the tips of her fingers had gone pale. "He wanted to buy us," Victoria said. "At roughly 30 cents on the dollar," Marcus said. His projection was that a public breach disclosure would drop the valuation to a point where the board would have no choice but to consider outside acquisition. "And you were going to make 30 cents on that transaction as well," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. Marcus didn't answer it like one. "Yes," he said. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Michael counted 8 seconds in his head. Then Victoria said very quietly to Patricia Hale, "I want Forsyth's name in front of the federal prosecutor's office by end of business today. I want every transaction Marcus has described in writing, signed, notarized, and time-stamped before he leaves this building. And I want a security hold on every system that Marcus Webb's credentials touch effective immediately." Patricia was already writing. "Victoria," Marcus said. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said. And unlike the word as Victoria had used it in the cafe an hour ago, deployed as a weapon dressed in courtesy, Marcus's sorry landed differently. It landed with the specific weight of something said too late to do what it was supposed to do, but said anyway, because some things need to be said, even when they can't be undone. "I mean that." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "I know you do," she said. "It doesn't change what happens next." She stood. She looked at Patricia. "I'll be in my office." She walked out. Michael sat for a moment longer. He looked at Marcus Webb, who was sitting in the aftermath of his own honesty, the way a person sits in a room after the furniture has been moved, aware that the space is the same, but unable to locate himself within it the way he used to. Michael reached across the table and picked up the printed logs, the diagram, the reactive paper pages. He organized them carefully the way he'd organized them in the cafe and placed them into his bag. "For what it's worth," Michael said, and Marcus looked at him. "You could have not told them about Forsyth. You had enough room to leave him out of it and still protect yourself with a partial cooperation agreement." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "I know," he said. "Why didn't you?" Marcus was quiet. Then he said, "Because I've spent 14 months telling myself it wasn't really about destroying the company, that Forsyth would have kept most of the staff, that the acquisition wouldn't be that bad for people." He looked at his hands. "But sitting in this room listening to you explain exactly what was going to happen, I stopped being able to tell myself that." Michael nodded. He didn't say anything else. He picked up his bag and walked out. Victoria was not in her office when her assistant led Michael there. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city, in the particular posture of someone who is doing their thinking in the space that motion can't reach. The assistant withdrew quietly. Michael stood near the door and waited. After a moment, Victoria said without turning, "Forsyth made calls to 3 board members in the past 6 months. I just pulled the visitor logs." Michael said nothing. "3 of my board members," Victoria said, and the word board carried a freight of implication that she didn't need to unpack. "I don't know what he said to them. I don't know if any of them were going to act on it. But they took the calls." "That changes your timeline," Michael said. "Yes." She turned from the window. Her face was composed, but just barely the way a structure is composed when the engineering that holds it is working at full capacity. "How fast can this move?" "Forsyth is cautious," Michael said. "He won't have left obvious trails. But Marcus's cooperation gives the prosecutor a starting point that bypasses the need to build the evidence from scratch. If they move quickly." "How quickly?" "Days," Michael said. "Not weeks. But it depends on whether Forsyth has any signal that something's changed. If he finds out about today before the prosecutor can act—" "He won't," Victoria said. It wasn't bravado. It was the statement of someone who had just decided something and was already in the process of executing it. She moved to her desk and sat down and opened her laptop. "I'm issuing a full communications hold on anyone who was in that conference room today. Nothing goes in or out about this matter without my sign-off. Not a text, not an email, not a word in a hallway." "That's the right call," Michael said. She looked up from the screen. "I keep making right calls based on what you tell me to do," she said. 3 hours ago I was—" She stopped. Something moved across her expression. "I was pouring coffee on your files." "You were operating on incomplete information," Michael said. "That's generous." "It's accurate," he said. "You made a judgment based on what you could see. What you could see was wrong. That happens." Victoria looked at him with the kind of attention that isn't really about the words being said, the kind that's trying to understand the person saying them. "Why aren't you angrier?" she said. "I would be angry." "I was," Michael said simply. "For about 30 seconds, while I was blotting the files." He met her gaze. "Then I was too busy to be angry." "That's not a personality," Victoria said. "That's a superpower." "It's parenthood," Michael said. "You don't have the option of staying in an emotion when someone else's needs are more immediate. You get good at moving through things." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you ever resent it? The way you gave up everything you could have had here, the career, the—" "No," Michael said. Immediately, without any of the hesitation that would have suggested he was being polite rather than honest. "Why not?" "Because I know what I have instead," he said. "And it's better." Victoria looked at him. "I don't know if I believe that," she said. "That's okay," Michael said. "You don't have to." Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her expression sharpened. "It's the board chair," she said. She looked at Michael for half a second, and in that half second, he understood that the next conversation was going to determine whether what they'd uncovered this morning was going to become a cleanup or a war. She picked up. "Richard," she said. "Yes, I was going to call you. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." A pause. "Because some of it involves calls you've been getting from a man named Daniel Forsyth." Michael watched the silence on her end. He watched her face. He watched the moment when she heard whatever Richard said, the board chair whose voice Michael couldn't make out from across the room, and her expression did something complicated and difficult, and ultimately resolving. Not into relief, into clarity. Into the particular clarity of someone who has just identified the last corner of a problem and understands now what needs to be done about it. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll explain everything. Come to the building. Come now." She paused. "Yes, it's that serious." She ended the call. She sat back in her chair. "He didn't know about the money," she said. "Forsyth made contact, pitched a strategic partnership. Richard thought it was a legitimate business conversation. He didn't know what was underneath it." "Is he someone you trust?" Michael asked. "He's someone I've trusted for 11 years, Victoria said. And then, with the faintest acknowledgement of everything the morning had done to the word trust. "Yes, I think so." "Then bring him in," Michael said. "You need your board on your side for what happens next." "What happens next," Victoria said slowly, "is that I announce a voluntary internal audit and a data security review, publicly, before Forsyth can control the narrative." She was thinking out loud now the way a person thinks when the pieces are moving fast and need to be placed correctly the first time. "I frame it as proactive, as leadership, as a company identifying a problem and addressing it before it could affect our clients." "Which is exactly what this is," Michael said. "Which is exactly what this is," she agreed. She looked at him. "I need you to stay involved, through the forensic audit, as a consultant. I want your name on the documentation." Michael looked at her. He thought about Lily, about the school field trip, about the pasta in the fridge and the library book and the bus at 4 o'clock. "I can work part-time," he said. "Defined hours. I need to be home by 4. Victoria Sterling, who had spent 11 years building a company on the premise that the work came first and everything else was organized around it, looked at him and said without a pause, 4 o'clock, every day. That's not negotiable." "No," Michael said. "It isn't." "Then we have a deal," she said, and extended her hand across the desk for the second time that morning. This time, the handshake was different. Not the careful, uncertain gesture she'd offered in the conference room, still weighted with apology. This one was something else. It was the handshake of people who have been through something together and come out the other side with a shared understanding of what the other person is made of. Michael took it. "Ms. Sterling," he said. "Victoria," she said. "Victoria." He let go of her hand. "The board chair is going to have questions about how this was discovered, about who brought it in." "I know. What are you going to tell him?" Victoria Sterling picked up her phone. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it down and looked at Michael Carter, at the worn jacket, the damp bag, the coffee stain still visible on his sleeve from where her deliberate carelessness had marked him an hour and 40 minutes ago. "I'm going to tell him," she said, "that someone walked into my building this morning and showed me something I needed to see, and that I almost missed it because I was too busy looking at what he was wearing to notice who he was." Michael was quiet for a moment. "That's honest," he said. "I'm working on that," she said. Apparently. The afternoon was going to be very long. There were calls to make and documents to secure, and attorneys to brief, and board members to convene, and a public statement that needed to be drafted, and a forensic team that needed authorization, and a federal prosecutor's office that needed to receive a package of evidence by end of business. And somewhere in all of it, at 4 o'clock, a man in a worn jacket was going to leave the building and walk to a bus stop and wait for a small girl with her mother's eyes to step off a yellow bus and run toward him. The afternoon was going to be very long. But Michael Carter had been doing long days for a while now. He picked up his bag. He got to work. He left the Evercrest building at 3:58, not because anyone asked him to. Not because the work was finished. The work was nowhere near finished. Patricia Hale was still on the phone with the prosecutor's office. The forensic compliance team was 3 hours into an access audit that would likely run through the night. Richard Calloway, the board chair, had arrived at 2:30 and spent 40 minutes in Victoria's office with the door closed, and when he'd come out, his face had the particular gravity of someone who has just had their understanding of a situation revised significantly upward in its seriousness. There was more to do than Michael could count, but he had told Victoria 4 o'clock, and it was a commitment, and commitments meant something to him in a way that had nothing to do with professional courtesy. They meant something because he had learned in the years after Sarah died that the small, reliable things, the predictable arrivals, the kept promises, the ordinary constancy of a parent who shows up when he said he would, were not small at all to a child who had already lost too much to uncertainty. So at 3:58, Michael Carter put on his still damp jacket, picked up his bag, and told Victoria's assistant to let her know he was leaving and would be available by phone. The assistant looked at him like he had said something in a foreign language. Michael smiled and walked to the elevator. He was at the bus stop at 4:04. Lily's bus pulled up at 4:11. He watched the doors open. He watched the kids come down the steps in the particular organized chaos of elementary school afternoon dismissal. Backpack swinging voices already going the compressed energy of a full school day, releasing itself the moment they hit the sidewalk. Lily was the fifth one off. She saw him immediately the way she always did, the specific radar that children have for the person they belong to in a crowd. She was 9 years old, wearing the blue jacket he'd bought her in September, and she had a drawing rolled up and tucked under one arm and was already talking before she reached him. Dad, we did a thing today with circuits and science, and Mrs. Patterson let me be the one who closed the switch, and the light bulb actually turned on, and everyone said, wow. And also Tyler said it wasn't that impressive, but Tyler is wrong. It was impressive, and also I finished my library book, so you don't have to take it back. Michael crouched down to her level, the way he always did when she was talking fast, which was most of the time, and took the rolled-up drawing she was already pressing into his hands. Can I see? It's for you, she said. We drew things that make us feel safe. He unrolled it. She had drawn a kitchen table. 2 chairs. 2 people at it, one tall and one small. Overhead, the particular lamp in their kitchen that had a slight wobble to it that he kept meaning to fix. Steam rising from 2 cups. He looked at it for a long moment. It's us having hot chocolate, Lily said, watching his face. I know, Michael said. Do you like it? I love it, he said, and meant it in the full and uncomplicated way that only a handful of things in his life had ever earned. He stood up. He took her hand. They walked. He didn't tell her about the day. She was 9. She didn't need the architecture of corporate fraud and federal prosecution and a CEO who had poured coffee on his files and then spent 6 hours rebuilding her understanding of herself. She needed hot chocolate and dinner, and someone to listen to the Tyler story in full detail, which took 11 minutes and involved several dramatic reenactments. He gave her all of it. That night, after Lily was asleep, Michael sat at the kitchen table, the one from the drawing with the wobbly lamp overhead, and opened his laptop and answered 17 emails and took 2 calls and read through 40 pages of access logs that Victoria's forensic team had sent over for his review. He worked until 1 in the morning. Then he closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet kitchen for a while, in the particular stillness of a house with a sleeping child in it, which is one of the most specific and irreplaceable kinds of quiet that exist. He thought about the day. He thought about the moment the coffee had hit his files, the heat of it, the deliberateness of it, the way the room had gone silent, the way he'd reached for the napkin without thinking because there was nothing else to do, because making a scene would have accomplished nothing, because somewhere in the long education of the years since Sarah died, he had learned that the things worth fighting for don't require you to raise your voice. He thought about Victoria Sterling's face when she'd seen the initials on the diagram. He thought about Marcus Webb saying "I'm sorry" and meaning it, and it not being enough. He thought about Lily's drawing, the two chairs, the steam from the cups. He turned off the lamp and went to bed. The next 3 weeks moved fast. The federal investigation into Daniel Forsyth opened formally on the second day. The prosecutor's office, once Patricia Hale, delivered Marcus Webb's cooperation agreement and Michael's documented evidence in a package that the lead prosecutor later described as the most organized and complete initial filing she had seen in 11 years of financial fraud cases, moved with the efficiency that surprised even Victoria. Michael knew it wouldn't be clean or quick. Federal investigations rarely were. But the foundation was solid, and solid foundations were what he built. He went to the Evercrest building every morning at 8:30. He worked until 3:45, handed off to the forensic team, and left. He ate lunch at the coffee shop on the first floor, not the private VIP section, just the regular counter, and reviewed documents, and answered questions, and walked people through the architecture of a system he'd built 7 years ago with the patient clarity of someone who understood it so completely that explaining it had become second nature. The forensic team was good. They found things Michael hadn't. Threads he'd identified but not fully pulled connections between Forsyth's financial network and 2 other mid-sized technology companies that appeared to be under similar pressure. The prosecutor's office expanded the investigation on the 8th day. Marcus Webb sat in an attorney's office in Back Bay and answered questions for 4 days straight. Daniel Forsyth in New York retained 3 lawyers and said nothing publicly. His assistant issued a statement calling the allegations defamatory. His lawyers filed a motion to suppress. The motion was denied. On the 14th day, Michael arrived at the Evercrest building and was met in the lobby by Victoria's assistant, who told him that Victoria wanted to see him before he went to the forensic team floor. He followed her to the elevator up to the 14th floor into Victoria's office. Victoria was on the phone. She held up one finger 1 minute, and Michael sat down in the chair across from her desk and waited. He looked around the office while he waited. He'd been in it several times over the past 2 weeks, but he'd been working every time focused on documents or screens or conversations. He hadn't looked at the room itself. Now he did. There were no personal items on her desk, no photographs. The walls held industry awards and framed coverage from business publications and a whiteboard with a timeline of company milestones written in precise marker. It was the office of someone who had made the work everything. He understood that. He'd had a version of that office once, metaphorically speaking. He knew what it looked like from the inside. Victoria ended the call. She set the phone down. She looked at Michael. "Forsyth made a move last night," she said. Michael was still. "What kind of move?" "He contacted one of the board members. Richard told me this morning." She leaned forward. "He claimed that the evidence against him was fabricated, that Marcus Webb is acting under duress, that I orchestrated the whole thing to deflect from my own financial mismanagement." The room was quiet for a moment. "He's panicking," Michael said. "Yes," Victoria said. "But a panicking man with 3 lawyers and a lot of money can still do damage." "What did the board members say?" "He told Richard immediately, which is the right response." Victoria looked at him steadily. "But it tells us that Forsyth is willing to go offensive. He's not going to sit quietly and wait for the process." "No," Michael said. "He isn't." He thought for a moment. "He's going to look for a pressure point." "He's going to look for you," Victoria said. The words landed without drama, but they landed squarely. Michael looked at her. "I've been a visible part of this from the beginning," he said. "Your name is on every document we've submitted," Victoria said. "The prosecutor's filing identified you as the originating source of the evidence. Forsyth's lawyers have your name." "And he's going to try to discredit me," Michael said. "Or pressure you," Victoria said. "Or both. I wanted you to know before it happened." Michael was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about Lily, About the school field trip. About the bus stop at 411. About the drawing with the 2 chairs and the wobbly lamp. "Have you received anything?" Victoria asked. "Any calls, any contact?" "No," Michael said. "Tell me immediately if you do." "I will." Victoria looked at him. Then she said, "Michael, if you want to step back from this, if it becomes a risk to you or your daughter." "It won't come to that," Michael said. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But I know that if I step back now, the evidence loses its clearest line of authentication. And Forsyth knows that too. That's what this is about. He wants me to step back." Victoria was quiet. "So I won't," Michael said simply. She held his gaze. "I want to put a security detail on your home," she said. "And on Lily's school. Discreet. You won't see them unless you need them." Something in Michael went very still. The part of him that was a father. The part that had spent 6 years building a world that was safe and predictable and reliable for a small girl who had already learned too young what it felt like to have that world upended. "For how long?" he said. "Until Forsyth is in custody or the case is far enough along that the risk decreases," Victoria said. "My head of security says 2 to 3 weeks." Michael thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "All right," he said. "Thank you," Victoria said. "Not in the transactional way. In the way of someone who understood what they were asking and what it cost the person they were asking it from." "Don't thank me," Michael said. "Just make sure they're good." "They're the best I have," she said. He nodded. He stood. He picked up his bag. "Michael," Victoria said. He turned. She was looking at him with the expression he'd seen developing over 2 weeks, an expression that had started as something like guilt and moved through something like respect, and had arrived by now at something more complicated than either. Something that was still finding its shape. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you told me, about why you left, about Lily packing her own lunch at 5 years old because she'd figured out you were somewhere else." She paused. "I don't have children. I've never made space for that. I've told myself it was a choice, a deliberate prioritization that I could always—" She stopped. "I'm 46 next month." Michael waited. "I'm not asking for advice," she said quickly. I don't know what I'm saying. She looked at the whiteboard with its company milestones. "I built all of this. I built it from a co-working space in Cambridge with 5 people, one of whom I now know was planning to take it apart. I have built something real. I know that." She turned back to him. "And I look at you, and you gave all of this up, the equivalent of all of this, and you don't regret it for a second. And I don't know what to do with that." Michael thought about how to answer. He thought about how the honest answer was never the comfortable one, and how that was okay, and how the best thing he could do was say what he actually believed, and let her do what she wanted with it. "You built something real," he said. "That's true. And what you built matters, and the people whose jobs depend on it, and the clients whose data you protect, and the industry you've shaped that's real. That counts." He paused. "But a company can survive without you. A specific child at a specific age during a specific window of years, they can't wait. They don't have a continuity plan, they just need you there." Victoria looked at him. "That's not an argument against ambition," he said. "It's not even an argument about children specifically. It's an argument about what can wait and what can't. Companies can recover from a CEO stepping back. 9-year-olds can't recover from their parents not being there." He met her eyes. "That's all." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her expression shifted back into operational mode. "I need to take this." "Go ahead," Michael said. He left her to it and walked down to the floor where the forensic team was working. The call that Victoria had taken was from the prosecutor's office. Michael found out the content of it at 11:15 when she appeared on the forensic floor with her phone in her hand and the expression of someone who has just received information they expected and hadn't expected simultaneously. "They've found the end of the money chain," she said. The room went quiet. The 4 members of the forensic team who had been working with focused discipline all morning looked up from their screens. "Forsyth wasn't the primary," Victoria said. "He was an intermediary." Michael set down the document he'd been reviewing. "Who's at the end?" he said. Victoria looked at him. And in the way that she looked at him, the slight tightening, the fractional pause, the breath that happened before the words. Michael understood that what she was about to say was going to change the shape of the thing they were looking at. "A hedge fund out of Geneva," she said. "Meridian Capital Partners." The room absorbed this. Then Michael said Meridian. "Yes," Victoria said. He said it again, not because he hadn't heard, but because the word was doing something in his mind, connecting to something, pulling a thread that he hadn't known was there. "Meridian Diagnostics," he said. "The healthcare startup. The original audit." Victoria looked at him. "The one that started all of this," he said slowly. "The company that hired me 3 weeks ago for a routine security audit. The company whose access logs showed the anomaly that led me here." He looked at Victoria. "Meridian Diagnostics. And Meridian Capital Partners," Victoria said quietly. "Different companies. Unrelated names." "Are they?" Michael said. The silence in the room lasted approximately 6 seconds. Then Victoria's forensic compliance officer, a woman named Dr. Sandra Cho, who had been the quietest person in the room all morning, said in a careful, measured voice, "The founding investment in Meridian Diagnostics, the Series A, came from a Swiss entity through a Delaware holding company. I flagged it 2 days ago as potentially significant. I didn't know why yet." She turned her laptop screen to face the room. The founding entity of Meridian Diagnostics' Series A investment. Meridian Capital Partners, Geneva. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Michael was doing the calculation, running the timeline, mapping the sequence of events that had brought him to a cafe on a rainy November morning with a bag full of printed files he'd been carrying for 3 weeks. "I wasn't a random auditor," he said, quietly, not alarmed, tracing it. "Meridian Diagnostics hired me specifically. They requested me by name. The CEO contacted me directly." He paused. "I thought it was because of my reputation in the field." "Maybe it was," Victoria said. "Or maybe someone knew exactly who I was," Michael said. "Knew that I'd built the original Evercrest system. Knew that I was one of the few people in the world who could identify this specific anomaly, and made sure I was the one who found it." The room was very quiet. Dr. Cho said, "That would mean someone wanted this discovered." "Not someone trying to protect Forsyth," Michael said. "Someone trying to stop him." Victoria looked at him. "Forsyth has competitors," Michael said. "Other people in his space who lose when he wins. Other funds that lose acquisition targets when he manufactures distressed sales. Someone who knew what he was doing and didn't want him to succeed." "And instead of going to law enforcement themselves," Victoria said following it, "they found the person most likely to find the right evidence and pointed him at it." "They hired me," Michael said, "for an audit they knew would lead here." Victoria looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. "So we've been played." "We've been helped," Michael said. "Whether we've been played depends on whether the outcome is something we can live with." The room absorbed this. "The outcome," Victoria said, "is that Forsyth gets caught and Evercrest gets saved." "Yes," Michael said. "Then I can live with it," she said. Victoria's phone rang again. She looked at it. She answered. Michael watched her listen, watched her expression move through a series of rapid adjustments, watched her press 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose, a gesture he hadn't seen from her before, the specific gesture of someone receiving news that requires a significant reconfiguration. "When?" she said. A pause. "How certain?" Another pause. "All right. Thank you." She ended the call. She looked at Michael. "They picked up Forsyth," she said. "An hour ago, at his office in New York. He was in the middle of a meeting. The forensic team collectively exhaled. Michael sat very still for a moment. His lawyers are filing a bond motion, Victoria continued. But the prosecutor says the financial documentation is strong enough that they're opposing bail on flight risk grounds. She thinks they'll keep him. Michael nodded. He didn't feel what he might have expected to feel. Not triumph, not relief exactly, though relief was part of it. What he felt was something quieter. The specific, undramatic satisfaction of a thing resolved. Of a problem correctly identified and correctly addressed, and now moving through the systems designed to handle it, which were doing their job as systems do, when they're built well and maintained properly. He thought about his files. The damp pages, the coffee-stained edges, the reactive paper that had given up its information when a woman's deliberate carelessness had applied exactly the right catalyst. He thought about the particular irony of that the thing meant to destroy his evidence had been the thing that revealed it. "Marcus," Victoria said suddenly. "Marcus needs to know." "His attorneys will tell him," Michael said. "I know," Victoria said. "I want to hear it for myself." She looked at Michael. "Not because I'm glad he's in trouble, because—" She paused, organizing something. "Because when he told us about Forsyth this morning, he chose to do the harder thing. And I want to know that choosing the harder thing produced a result." Michael looked at her. "That's a kind instinct," he said. "I'm working on those," she said, and it carried the weight of an admission and something like a promise. She moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. "Come with me." He followed her. Marcus Webb's attorneys had established a temporary working arrangement in a conference room 2 floors below. It was in the particular irony of the day the same floor where the building's IT security department operated, whose logs had contained the evidence that had made all of this possible. Victoria knocked on the conference room door. One of Marcus's attorneys opened it. Victoria said she needed 2 minutes. The attorney stepped back. Marcus was sitting at the table. He looked up when they came in. He looked at both of them. His face carried the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent an entire day telling the truth. After a long time not telling it drained, and somehow underneath the drain lightened. "They arrested Forsyth," Victoria said. Marcus closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a moment. When he opened them, he looked at Victoria. "Okay," he said, quietly. "Just that." "I wanted you to know," Victoria said. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He looked like he was going to say something, and then decided against it, and then changed his mind. "Victoria," he said. "The company. What happens to the company?" "The company is fine," she said. "The company is going to be fine." He nodded. He looked down at the table. "Good," he said. "That's—" He stopped. "That's good." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't meant to be. It was something smaller and more human, the knowledge that the thing you tried to damage is still standing, and that this knowledge carries its own particular weight in the accounting of a life. Victoria looked at him for one more second. Then she turned and left. Michael followed her into the hallway. They stood there for a moment. "You have 37 minutes before 4 o'clock, Victoria said. Michael looked at his watch. 3:23. "I'll be back at 8:30 tomorrow, he said. "I know," she said. He picked up his bag from where he'd left it in the forensic room, said goodbye to Dr. Cho, and her team took the elevator down, walked through the lobby and pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon. The rain from that morning had stopped. The sky was the particular gray of a November afternoon in Boston that carries no particular feeling, not sad, not hopeful, just present, just there, just the day being what it was. He walked 6 blocks to the bus stop. He got there at 3:51. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands in the pockets of his worn jacket and his damp bag over his shoulder and waited for a yellow bus to turn the corner. He thought about Lily's drawing. 2 chairs, 2 cups of steam, the wobbly lamp they still hadn't fixed. He thought, tomorrow I'll fix the lamp. The bus turned the corner. The doors opened. Lily came down the steps, fifth the same as always, already talking. Dad, Tyler apologized about the circuit thing. But he only did it because Mrs. Patterson made him, so I don't know if it counts. Does it count if someone makes you apologize? Michael thought about Marcus Webb saying "I'm sorry" in a conference room where the evidence of everything he'd done was spread on the table in front of him. He thought about Victoria Sterling in the hallway of her own building saying "I didn't see the man inside the jacket." He thought about what made an apology real. Whether it was the absence of external pressure or the presence of genuine understanding. Whether it mattered more where an apology came from or where it went. "I think," he said, crouching down to her level, "that it counts more if the person who made them apologize was right to do it." Lily considered this with the focused seriousness she applied to most things. So if Mrs. Patterson was right that Tyler was wrong, then the apology counts. "That's pretty close," Michael said. "Okay," Lily said. "Then it counts." She put her hand in his. "Can we have hot chocolate? It's cold." "We can have hot chocolate," Michael said. They walked. Behind them, a man in a dark jacket standing 40 feet back on the opposite side of the street fell into a quiet parallel pace. He was good at his job. Lily didn't notice him. Michael did. He'd been told what to look for, but he didn't look back. He just walked. His daughter's hand was warm in his. Her voice was going at full speed, covering Tyler and Mrs. Patterson and the circuit board, and a song she'd been learning in music class, and a book she wanted from the library, and whether it was too late in the year to plant something in the small planter on the back porch. The day had held more than most days. It had held a man who had tried to take something apart and been stopped. A woman who'd looked at the wrong things for a long time and was learning to look at the right ones. A company that had come close to the edge and been pulled back. An arrest made in an office in New York. A drawing of a kitchen table in a backpack getting slightly crumpled against a 9-year-old girl's side. Michael Carter held his daughter's hand and walked home through the cold November air and thought about none of it. He was thinking about hot chocolate. He was thinking about the lamp he was going to fix tonight. He was thinking about how tomorrow he would get on a bus at 8:15 and go back to Evercrest and do what needed to be done. And then at 3:45 he would leave, and at 4:11 a bus would turn a corner, and a small girl would come down the steps, and she would see him immediately the way she always did. And that was enough. It had always been enough. That was the thing he'd known for 6 years, that it had taken a coffee-stained morning in a downtown cafe to help somebody else begin to understand. 6 weeks after Daniel Forsyth was arrested in his New York office, the story broke publicly. Not through a leak. Not through the kind of messy, half-informed press coverage that usually accompanied corporate fraud cases, where reporters assembled fragments and guessed at the rest. Victoria Sterling released the statement herself on a Tuesday morning in a format and with a level of detail that made it impossible to distort. She named the fraud. She named the perpetrators. She described exactly what had been done and how it had been caught and what Evercrest was doing to ensure it could not happen again. She did not minimize. She did not redirect. She did not use the language that corporate PR departments use when they want to sound accountable without actually being accountable. She was specific. She was honest. She was by every measure of the word transparent. The business press did not know what to do with it. They had been trained by years of corporate crisis management to expect deflection, so directness arrived like a disruption to their pattern recognition. Several major publications ran the story on their front pages, not primarily because of the fraud itself. Fraud happened, unfortunately, with a frequency that had its own taxonomy, but because of the way the CEO had chosen to address it. One headline read, "Evercrest CEO takes full ownership of fraud scandal, refuses standard playbook." Another read, "What happened when a tech CEO decided to just tell the truth." Victoria read both of them at her desk at 7 in the morning and felt something she had not expected to feel, which was that the directness hadn't cost her anything. It had given her something. A kind of solidity. The specific weight of standing exactly where you are without performing a different version of yourself for the audience. She had Michael to thank for that. Not because he'd told her to be honest, he hadn't. He'd said, do the right thing and let the rest follow. but watching him operate over 6 weeks, watching the way he moved through every complicated moment with the same unperturbed clarity, had done something to her internal calibration. Had slowly, without announcement, shifted something. She picked up her phone and sent him a text. "Just stories out, you've seen it," he replied 4 minutes later. "Saw it. Well done." She stared at those 2 words for a moment. Well done. Not congratulations on the coverage, not great strategy, not the language of people who measure value in public outcomes. Just a simple assessment of a thing done correctly. The same way you'd tell a kid they'd done their homework right. She put the phone down and got back to work. The federal case against Forsyth moved faster than most. The cooperation agreement with Marcus Webb had given the prosecutor a foundation that compressed what would ordinarily have been an 18-month investigation into something with much cleaner lines. Forsyth's lawyers were good, they were expensive, and they were experienced, and they filed motions with the regularity of people who understood that delay was a form of victory. But the evidence was what it was, and what it was thorough. Michael had made sure of that. He had spent 6 weeks building documentation with the same patience and precision he'd applied to the original security architecture back in 2019. Every access log, every timestamp, every financial thread, cross-referenced, authenticated, layered with the kind of technical specificity that made it very difficult for opposing counsel to find a foothold. He had done it working part-time, 4 days a week, never past 3:45. Dr. Sandra Cho, the forensic compliance officer who had been working alongside him, told Victoria privately during week 4 that Michael Carter was the most organized analytical mind she had encountered in 20 years of forensic work. She said it in the particular tone of someone who did not give this kind of assessment lightly. Victoria told Michael what Sandra had said. Michael said, "She's better than I am at the financial side. Tell her I said so." Victoria relayed this. Sandra looked at her for a moment, and then smiled in a way that suggested she had decided she liked Michael Carter quite a lot. The day the grand jury returned the indictment on Forsyth, a Tuesday morning, 7 weeks, in which Michael spent at the Evercrest building, reviewing the last of the access logs before handing the final documentation package to the prosecutor's office. Victoria came down to the forensic floor at 11 o'clock with 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of Michael. He looked at it, she looked at him, and then, because neither of them needed to say it, but it hung in the air between them with the specific weight of a shared history that had started in a very different way. Victoria said, "I promise I didn't spill it this time." Michael looked at the cup, then up at her. And for the first time in what had been 6 weeks of focused, serious work, he laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. The kind that comes from the chest, that arrives without warning, that is entirely involuntary and entirely genuine. Victoria laughed too. It surprised her. She hadn't expected to laugh today of all days, with the grand jury news still registering, and the statement still circulating, and the board calls still waiting on her schedule. But it came, and it was real, and for a few seconds, the 2 of them stood in the forensic compliance room on the 12th floor of the Evercrest building, and laughed at a joke that only existed because of the worst moment of their first meeting. Dr. Cho, sitting 3 feet away, looked at them both, decided she was not going to ask, and went back to her screen. Michael picked up the coffee cup. He drank it. It was good. It was the same cafe downstairs, the same beans, the same equipment. It tasted exactly like the coffee that had ended up on his files 7 weeks ago, which meant it tasted like the beginning of this whole thing, and that was either funny or poetic, depending on how you looked at it. He decided it was both. "The package is ready," he told Victoria. "Everything the prosecutor's office needs for the final documentation is organized and labeled and cross-indexed. Sandra's team can walk them through it. You don't need me for the handoff." Victoria looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprised, she'd known this day was coming. But the arrival of a thing you've been expecting still lands differently than the anticipation of it. "I know," she said. "The forensic work is done," Michael said. "What comes next is legal process. I'm not a lawyer. And Sandra's team knows the material as well as I do now. Better on the financial architecture. I know, Victoria said again. I'm not arguing. You have a look like you might be about to argue, he said. I have a look, she said carefully, like I'm about to ask you something and I'm not sure how you're going to take it. Michael set down the coffee cup. Then ask it. Victoria pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The direct version of herself, the one that had been emerging incrementally over the past 7 weeks. Still precise, still controlled, but less armored. More honest in the small moments, the in-between ones. I want to create a permanent position, she said. Senior security architect. Reporting directly to me, responsible for the ongoing integrity of the entire data platform architecture. She looked at him steadily. I want you in it. Michael looked at her. Part-time, Victoria said. Your hours, 4 days a week. You leave at 3:45. You're home by 4:11. Non-negotiable written into the contract. I don't ever call you after 7 in the evening, and I don't email you on weekends. Michael said nothing for a moment. I restructured the role specifically, Victoria said. This isn't me trying to rebuild the thing you walked away from 6 years ago. I know that's not something I can offer you, and I'm not trying to. This is... She paused. This is me asking someone I trust to help me make sure nothing like this ever happens to this company again. On terms that work for your life, not terms that work for my schedule. That's a significant shift from how you typically run things, Michael said. Yes, Victoria said simply. What changed? You know what changed, she said. He did. He had watched it change incrementally over 7 weeks. Watched her adjust. Watched her start to notice the members of her staff as people, the assistant whose mother was ill, the IT analyst who was going through a divorce, the junior forensic officer who worked 12-hour days. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she was afraid that ordinary effort wasn't enough. Watched Victoria start to see them. To ask. To adjust things that she had the power to adjust. Not dramatically, not with announcements, quietly. The way real change happens, which is usually without fanfare, and mostly looks like small decisions made differently than they used to be. I'll think about it, Michael said. That's not a no, Victoria said. It's not a no. He agreed. She nodded. She picked up her coffee cup and stood. Think about it at home, she said. With Lily. Ask her what she thinks. Michael looked at her. She's 9. She has opinions, Victoria said. You've told me that repeatedly. She has very strong opinions, Michael confirmed. Then ask them, Victoria said. I'd be interested to know what she says. She left the forensic floor. Michael sat with his coffee and the organized stacks of documentation that represented 7 weeks of the most complex professional work he'd done since the original Evercrest architecture build, and he thought about it. He thought about the permanence of it, the commitment, the way a permanent position means you have decided for the foreseeable future that this is where you are. He thought about Lily packing her own lunch at 5 years old. He thought about what it would mean to do work that mattered on hours that also meant the bus stop at 4:11, and whether those two things could coexist inside the same life without one of them slowly consuming the other. He thought about Victoria saying, I restructured the role specifically. He didn't decide anything that afternoon. He finished the documentation. He handed it off to Sandra. He said goodbye to the forensic team, who had become over 7 weeks the specific kind of colleagues you make when you work intensely on something that matters, not close friends yet, but people whose competence you respect and whose company you've come to find easy. He left at 3:45. He was at the bus stop at 4:07. Lily came off the bus talking about a story she'd written in class, which her teacher had said was the best in the grade, which Tyler had disputed. And then Tyler had actually read it and admitted it was good, and this time the admission was unprompted, so it fully counted. I wrote it about you, Lily said as they walked. Michael looked down at her. About me. About a dad who fixes things, she said. But not like tools, like situations, Like when something is broken and nobody knows how to make it not broken. That's what you do. Michael was quiet for half a block. That's very accurate, he said. I know, Lily said with the particular confidence of someone who has paid close attention. That night after dinner, after homework, after Lily had fallen asleep with a chapter book open on her chest that he gently removed and set on the nightstand. Michael went to the kitchen and sat down at the table under the lamp he had fixed 2 weeks ago and thought about Victoria's offer. He thought about what Lily had written. A dad who fixes things, not tools, situations. He thought about the fact that Evercrest's data infrastructure was a significant and complex system that he had built and that had been exploited, and that if maintained correctly could be made genuinely more secure than it had ever been. Not just repaired, but improved, built forward, made into something that would be harder to compromise the next time someone tried. He thought about the fact that there would always be a next time. That the kind of people Daniel Forsyth represented didn't disappear because one of them got caught. They adjusted. They recalibrated. They found new gaps. And he thought about being one of the people who made sure the gaps got closed first. He opened his laptop. He wrote an email to Victoria. 2 sentences. I'll take the position. I want the hours in writing before I sign anything. He sent it. He closed the laptop. He fixed himself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table for a while in the quiet of the house, listening to the absence of sound that meant his daughter was sleeping safely in the next room, and felt the particular peace of a person who knows with some certainty that they are in the right place. 3 months later, Victoria Sterling stood in front of 400 people at the Evercrest annual company meeting, and said things that the people in that room would repeat for years afterward. She did not begin with the financial results, which were strong. She did not begin with the recovery narrative, which was compelling. She did not begin with the board's confidence in the leadership team, or the client retention numbers, or the forensic audit's clean findings. She began with a story. She told them about a morning in November, about rain, about a man in a worn jacket sitting in the corner of the company cafe, reading documents that were, as it turned out, about to save the company. She told them about what she had done. She did not soften it or reframe it. She said, I looked at that man, and I decided in about 3 seconds that he wasn't worth my attention. I was wrong. I was wrong in a way that should embarrass me, and it does, and I'm going to tell you about it because the lesson is one I think all of us need to hear. The room was very quiet. She told them what Michael had found and what he had done with it, and how he had sat through a humiliation that she had deliberately inflicted on him and come out the other side not smaller but larger, not angrier but clearer, not diminished but entirely infuriatingly intact. She said, the person who saved this company was sitting in our cafe and I tried to throw him out because his jacket was old. She paused. She said, I want us to be a company that never does that again. Not to a customer, not to a colleague, not to the most junior person on the most junior team. I want us to be a company that sees people, actually sees them, not what they're wearing, not what floor they work on, not what their title is. I want us to see who they are and what they're capable of, and I want us to treat them accordingly. She paused again. Then she said, I have a lot to learn about that. I'm still learning it. But I wanted you to know that I know it. And that the most important thing this company did in the last quarter wasn't closing a deal or winning a contract. It was one man choosing to walk into our building on a rainy morning and do the right thing, even when no one was treating him like he was worth anything. And I think we owe him more than a line in an audit report. She looked out at the room. She said, Michael, if you'd stand up. In the 4th row, Michael Carter in a jacket that was still not new stood up. He did not look comfortable with the attention. He looked like a man who had agreed to stand up because someone he respected had asked him to, and who was counting the seconds until he could sit back down. The room gave him a standing ovation that lasted long enough that it stopped being a polite professional courtesy and became something else. Something genuine. The kind that happens when 400 people are responding not just to what they've heard, but to what it means to the permission it gives them to believe that the right thing done quietly in an ordinary moment can reverberate further than anyone expects. Michael sat down. Lily, who was sitting next to him, leaned over and whispered, "They really liked you." "They liked the story," Michael said quietly. "You're the story," she said with the unarguable logic of a 9-year-old who has decided something is true. He didn't argue with her. After the meeting in the corridor outside the main hall, Victoria found them. She crouched down to Lily's level the way Michael always did, and she looked at the girl directly, without the managed distance she tended to maintain with most people. "Your dad told me you've been helping him figure out some of the tech concepts," Victoria said, "for the architecture documentation." Lily looked at her with focused assessment. "I asked what everything was, and he explained it." "That's helping," Victoria said. "He used hot chocolate as an analogy for encryption," Lily said. "It was pretty good." Victoria looked up at Michael. Michael shrugged. "It worked," he said. Victoria looked back at Lily. "Can I ask you something?" Lily considered this the way she considered most things seriously, with the genuine consideration of a child who has not yet learned to treat questions as rhetorical. "Okay. Do you know what your dad does for work, I mean?" Lily said, "He fixes things, not with tools, with thinking." She paused. "And sometimes with paper that gets coffee on it." Victoria Sterling looked at this 9-year-old girl who had her father's steady eyes and her mother's face, and the particular confidence of a child who has been raised by someone who listened to her, actually listened, and felt something in her chest that she had not expected to feel in a hallway outside a corporate meeting room. She had been building things for 11 years, companies and systems and structures. She had been very good at it. She would continue to be good at it. But she had not understood until approximately 7 weeks ago that the most important thing you can build is the specific, ordinary, unremarkable architecture of showing up for the people who need you. That the most sophisticated thing Michael Carter had ever constructed was not an encryption protocol or a security logging system or a forensic documentation package. It was the person his daughter had just described, a dad who fixes things with thinking. She stood up. She looked at Michael. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the work, not for the forensic files, or the grand jury testimony, or the security architecture review. For all of it. For the whole of the thing that had started on a rainy Tuesday morning when she had looked at a man and decided in 3 seconds that she knew who he was." "You don't need to thank me," Michael said. "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." He nodded once. Victoria looked at Lily. "It was very nice to meet you," Lily said. "Your company has good hot chocolate." Victoria laughed. "I'll make sure they keep it on the menu." She walked back into the building. Michael stood in the corridor with his daughter, who immediately took his hand and asked whether they were going to take the T home or walk, because walking was faster. But her feet hurt. But also she wanted to see the bookstore on Boylston, but only if they had time before dinner. And also, could dinner be pasta? Michael listened to all of it. He said they would take the tea look at the bookstore if it was quick, and yes, dinner could be pasta. They went. And that was the end of it, in the way that things end when they've resolved into the shape they were always supposed to take. Not with a dramatic closing scene or a triumphant final note, but quietly, ordinarily, with a man and his daughter walking to a subway station in the afternoon. Her hand in his. Her voice going at full speed about books and pasta and the correct criteria for determining when an apology counts. The lamp in the kitchen was fixed. The pasta was good. The library book was returned on time. And every morning after that, Michael Carter left the house at 8:15 and took the bus across town and walked into a building where people were starting slowly and imperfectly, and with the inevitable setbacks of real institutional change to see each other more clearly. He did work that mattered. He left at 3:45 without apology. He was at the bus stop before the bus arrived. He was there when Lily stepped off, the same as always, every day, talking before she reached the bottom step. That was the thing about a man who had chosen deliberately and with full understanding of what he was choosing to make his life small in the ways that looked small from the outside and were not small at all. He never needed anyone to tell him he had made the right call. He already knew. He had known it since the morning he'd walked out of a corner office with his laptop under his arm and gotten in his car and started building from that day forward the only thing he had ever built that was truly impossible to take apart. The kind of thing that cannot be hacked or defrauded or acquired at a discount. The kind of thing that shows up at bus stops. The kind of thing that a 9-year-old girl draws with 2 chairs and 2 cups of steam and puts under the category of things that make her feel safe. That was Michael Carter. That was enough. That was everything.